And yet, here's something that I think we need to think about. Whenever we consider these possibilities, we need to constantly be mindful of the fact that we love to scare the hell out of a film.
Warning, this is not entertainment.
Hello and welcome to Eschaton. Today we have a guest on the program. His name is Farzin Toossi, and he's the director of a film called The Medicine. It's been released at film festivals across the country, but so far it has not been released to a broader general audience, and it's not available for rent on the small screen. But it will be coming out in a few months later this year, so keep your eyes peeled for it. It's called The Medicine. I was able to preview it a couple of months ago. I got a pre-screening, and it was very interesting, to say the least, so I wanted to get on the phone and actually have a conversation with the film director. So, again, his name is Farzin Toossi, and what you're about to hear is the conversation that he and I had a couple of weeks ago on the topic of the film, as well as just talking about some of the themes and concepts that arise in general. So, without giving too much away about the film, just a little bit of background. Again, it's called The Medicine, and it's a documentary that explores the cultural and the health significance of ayahuasca, and not only ayahuasca, but the psychedelic phenomena in general. Now, I know I have had a guest on the film, on the show before, who actually starred in another film. I've had a couple of guys on. They were ex-military vets who had some breakthroughs in treating PTSD through ayahuasca. That film is much different than the content explored here. So that explored more of the medical benefits, and I would say some of the psychological benefits. We'll touch on that a little bit, but this episode and this conversation is focused heavily on the spiritual side, and I guess what you'd say is more of the metaphysical component of the ayahuasca experience and the psychedelic experience in general. So it looks at both the scientific and the shamanic angles, but we're going to really hone in on the shamanic angles, including views of scholars and authors such as Rachel Harris and Daniel Pinchbeck. It also follows actually a couple of key characters who are kind of B-level celebrities in the film on their ayahuasca journey. One of them is actually NFL Hall of Famer Kerry Rhodes, who is somebody I grew up really admiring and watching on the football field. So kind of a little treat there if you're a sports fan. Another is the actress Anna Lynn McCord, best known from 90210. If you've ever seen her on TV, I'm sure you might recognize the face. But anyway, these two individuals, among a couple of other characters, decide to try ayahuasca and address some personal struggles. And the film kind of uses them as sort of the lens of the viewer. We kind of see it through their eyes, first time going into it, and just what they learned from a spiritual perspective and just a personal growth perspective. We're going to use that as a springboard, but we don't talk too much about the film itself. We actually talk about the broader concepts surrounding it on more of a metaphysical and a spiritual level. So in the film, they're guided by this shaman. His name is Teta Juanito Guillermo Chindoy Chindoy. So it's a long name. I think they mostly just call him Taita in the film. But anyway, he's a very interesting character. We'll talk a little bit about him in the film, and then just the role of the shaman in general, historically, not only in the Amazon, but in the modern context as well, what role they play and what the significance of the spiritual journey is. So while ayahuasca is growing in popularity, perhaps, as popular as it's ever been in the West, it's no surprise that the controversy surrounding it and also the misinformation surrounding it is also growing. So we talk about that a little bit as well. So The Medicine will dive into the history and the spiritual significance of ayahuasca and plant-based medicines in general. But again, we're really going to hone in this time on the spiritual side of it. So kick back, listen to the conversation. Hope you enjoy it. If you have any questions, kick them over to me. Contact information, as always, will be in the show notes. You can reach out to us on the website, joshuawisely.com, and you can always contact us directly through the email account, which is linked to the show notes. So hope to engage with you guys there. If you haven't done so, please leave us a 4 or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps spread the show and just reach a broader audience. So thank you for those of you who have done it. And as always, thank you to our Patreon sustainers and our PayPal sustainers who help this show grow and, sustain us from month to month. So again, much appreciation for all of you. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon to talk more about, the chaos and the hot topics that are going on in the world. But I wanted to get this one out first as soon as possible. And again, stay healthy, stay safe, everyone. We'll talk soon. Take care. Farzin, welcome to the Eschaton podcast.
Hey, thanks a lot, Josh. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we could take some time here and finally connect. I know we had some issues coordinating before, but I'm glad I've got you on the line. I was able to watch the film, The Medicine, a few weeks back, and really just wanted to pick your brain. So as I've said in the intro, for those listening, you are the director and producer on the film, one of the principal filmmakers, and I just wanted to, I guess, start off by getting to know you a little bit and having you kind of give your story to the audience in terms of what got you interested into this field, of plant medicines and ayahuasca in particular, and kind of say what set you down this journey of, creating a film about it.
Well, it was all quite by accident, really. I have been in the entertainment industry for about 23 years, different aspects, but generally producing. And in the summer of 2016, I had the privilege of trying ayahuasca for the first time. At the time, my partner, wife, was reeling from the loss of her father and was really having a hard time dealing with that. And she got this opportunity to go down to Costa Rica to a resort called Rhythmia to try ayahuasca. She had no idea what she was doing or why she was going there. She was just offered this opportunity, and she said, okay, I'll go. And she got there, she tried ayahuasca, and it profoundly changed her. And I saw how she had been, if you will, helped, that I decided to go down and try it myself without really knowing anything about it. I didn't do any research or homework on it. I just went down there to try it. And part of what drew me to it was she says she connected with her father, and more interesting to me, she says she connected with my father and talked to my father, who passed away in 1991. And I was like, well, shit, if she's talking to my dad, I want to go talk to him. And I decided to get on a plane and go down and try it. Of course, many times later, I still haven't connected with my father, but this particular medicine has really had profound effects on me.
Mm. You touched on something that was kind of central, for my interest in this topic as well, which is kind of the spiritual aspect, passed on relatives. In your case, a lot of people, now that this is kind of a hot topic and, front and center in the media spotlight in many regards, and it's moving toward trial scenarios and studies in places like Johns Hopkins and other clinical research laboratories are actually, taking a serious second glance at psychedelics and hallucinogenics. A lot of them are trying to, I think, and this isn't a bad thing. I think maybe it's necessary in order to kind of get the taint or the stigma off of it. They're trying to focus more on the medicinal and the positive aspects, but from more of a mainstream perspective, they're trying to kind of steer clear of maybe the spirituality or more of the, I guess, esoteric might be the word, aspects of some of these plant medicines. One of the things I like so much about your film when I was watching it was that you kind of put that front and center and don't shy away from it at all. I think a lot of films on the subject, at least the ones I've seen, tend to go into the extreme one way or the other. They'll focus purely on the medicinal benefits, focus purely on the psychological benefits, or they'll go the other way and focus, way down the rabbit hole into like the spirituality aspect of it and, the traditional psychedelic worldview. There's kind of a fine line that not many people navigate very well. I thought you did a really good job of focusing both on the science and the spirituality in the film. So could you dive a little bit deeper into, what you've discovered over the last couple of years in not only the revelations on the spiritual side and personal growth, but, maybe growth and things that you've come to learn from a scientific understanding and how these medicines influence and can help us in that regard?
Well, I think we really tried hard to try and focus on all aspects of this plant medicine. And for me, what was interesting is that how is it that these tribes, these indigenous people in the Amazon were able to put together 2 different plants to get this effect. And I don't think science really has the ability to explain that. With the number of plants that are in the Amazon basin, I think 150,000 different plant species. How was it that they were able to do this? And for me, that was super interesting. And what we tried to do was we tried to say, okay, well, here's what science is saying about it, and here's what they're saying about it. And what they're saying about it is that, hey, the spirits came down and told us what to use. And I kind of believe that, right, in a way, because I don't think there's really a plausible explanation that science can give us for a lot of the things that really happen with this medicine or other traditional rituals or medicines or really things in life. I don't think science can fully explain everything. And I think this is why a lot of the schools shy away from it. A lot of scientists shy away from spirituality, and they don't want to get themselves involved in it, is because they really have no explanation, and they don't want to commingle the two. Because they just have a very sort of straight black and white perspective. And I kind of understand that, because I had a very black and white perspective prior to taking ayahuasca. I didn't believe in God, right? And now I'm really a believer in the universe, if you will, God, whatever, creator, whatever you want to call this source that's put all this together. And I think that we wanted to really dive in and cover all that, as well as the fact that science can't really explain how ayahuasca does the things it does. For me, it seems to me, this is just my personal opinion, which it seems to me that if we do have our spiritual health, maybe that helps us in other areas of our lives, right? With physical health. It seems like the indigenous people don't have the ailments that we have, whether it's mental or physical, and everything seems to manifest itself physically, right? All these problems that we're having winds up giving us all these ailments that we seek medical attention for. That's just my opinion.
So you said that the ayahuasca experience gave you a belief or a faith in God. I guess, how did that manifest itself? Because it's a common statement, for people to say they believe in God. But what does that look like for you? Like what specifically about the experience gave you this, belief in the, the unknown concept or the unknown idea of a deity, if you're coming from an atheistic background? And what does that God look like? What does the universe look like in terms of the enlightenment that you've received through the plant medicine?
Well, for me, I think it was just my rational mind starting to accept irrational things that were happening around me. Things were happening that I could not explain, and I was seeing it with my eyes and feeling it. And one thing about taking ayahuasca is that you're pretty much always there in your head, right? You have your wits about you. It's not you're not blacking out and not remembering things. You're there. You're fully present. And a lot of things that happened just did not make sense, right? It would just defy logic, defy anything. And the more things happen, the more you start changing your perspective on things. And I think that's ultimately there came a point 6 months into it where I just sort of threw my hands up and I said, look, I have to believe in something that's higher than what we've been led to believe. My father, growing up, always told me to choose a religion when you turn 18. I wasn't raised with any kind of religion, and I think he was an atheist. So I wasn't really. I always felt that God was a very convenient explanation for things that you couldn't explain. It's somebody passes away, well, God willed it. then how can you argue with that? How do we get here? Well, God put us here. And, and as crazy as it sounds, I'm at that point where now I believe in that God, but not in the Judeo-Christian sense of the word. This universe, and what is the universe? And I think that's, I don't know whether I'm there yet where I fully understand what the universe is and what the purpose of all this is.
Yeah, I think that's a heavy load for anyone to bear, trying to understand what the universe is. I don't think the ayahuasca, would ever deliver any of us completely on that journey, but it definitely, hearing you talk about it, I can relate to some of that. I'm just nodding my head here. It definitely, it's like for me, it was like going from black and white to color, just in my perception of, I guess, the unseen, or like the mind and just the deep oceans of the psyche. For you mentioned some things you couldn't explain, or maybe strange phenomena while you were, under the influence of the medicine. My audience is familiar with, ayahuasca in terms of, they know the components, they know how you consume the ayahuasca, they know some of the, cliche or stereotypical stories, such as the serpent goddesses and, things like that. But for you in particular, I'd be interested in hearing what your specific encounters are, some of the strange phenomena you experienced while under the influence of the ayahuasca, partially because I guess I'm curious to see how it compares to my experience, even though I know everybody's is different, but then also because, that's a very profound personal experience. I mean, you don't have to give away any deeply personal details, but I'm curious to know, for anything that shapes and changes and reconstructs your worldview like that, there has to be profound imagery and experiences involved. So I'm curious to know what that was for you.
Well, there was really a wide range of stuff. One of which is hearing friends who doing ayahuasca and speaking a different language during the ceremony than they speak, right? So all of a sudden you hear somebody speaking Portuguese, and that's not their native tongue, and they don't speak it. That to me was a little bit out of the norm and eye-opening. On a personal front, and there are certain things. For example, in the film, we talk about how when they use the Waira, they're summoning other Taitas who've moved on to, who've passed on to come and help. And the first time I did ayahuasca or yahe with Taita Juanito, I had a really rough night, and in the middle of the night, they constantly had to come and check up on me, and they come over and they blow the chandur and they do what they can to try and help you. And at one point, I was just lying back, and again, I just want to reiterate, you're always there. You're always aware of what's going on, and you're not you're having visions, but you're not hallucinating, right? In a way. So I was just sitting there, going through it, and then all of a sudden I feel droplets of liquid on my face, and my thinking was exactly what these guys are making the rounds and blowing chandur. And then I look up and there's nobody there, and the next day I was talking to some people around there, and several people had that experience, and I thought, so I asked them and I said, look, what's that all about? And they told me, well, and there were a lot of people there. There was about 70 people doing the medicine at that ceremony with Taita and all that. He goes, well, the Taitas that have gone, they come and help. And I know it sounds absurd, right? I know it sounds crazy, but in a weird way, I believe it.
Interesting. So I know in the United States, for reasons we won't delve too far into, ayahuasca is still considered a Schedule I substance, unless it's being used for maybe religious or ceremonial purposes. I know there's some loopholes in certain states, but that's not the case, obviously, in South America. So there's a lot of tourism. There's a lot of, I guess, young, curious minds that go and sample ayahuasca in the Amazon. I'm wondering, have you found that with this modern resurgence or modern commercialization or maybe discovery or rediscovery by Westerners, has it been tainted in any sort of way? The impression I got from your film is that there's a very, sacred, very true to the shamanistic, I guess, community. There's a very sacred aspect and a very sacred, ritual component still around the medicine. But I've also heard horror stories of, that not really being treated with care in every circle or every society. And because of that, it's kind of damaged the reputation maybe a little bit of the ayahuasca experience. I'm wondering, have you seen any of that while you were making the film, or is it mostly, still pure and intact in that environment?
Well, I think it's pure and intact with the right people. I think people who want to seek ayahuasca need to find reputable shamans and really vet who they're sitting with, who's going to be holding the space. And I think we made a kind of a bit of a point of it in the documentary. And I like what Graham Hancock says, that the shaman is really there to ward off evil spirits that can potentially come into that space. And I kind of believe that you're vulnerable and you're open and you want to be with the right energy, the right people taking care of you. And I do think in Peru I did ayahuasca in Peru off of Cusco with somebody that the locals recommended once, but I haven't really gone to places like Iquitos where a lot of this ayahuasca tourism takes place. But I would imagine there are a lot of people who are passing themselves off as shamans who really have no business serving medicine.
What role do you think the serpent imagery plays in the ayahuasca? Like, what is the serpent? You probably heard of, the mother. I'm sure you've heard of the mother ayahuasca and seen some of that imagery, and whether you personally experienced it or just heard it through others. I'm curious to know what your interpretation is, or maybe the shamans that what their interpretation is of the serpent imagery and the serpent manifestation. I had a very, very, I guess, serpent focused sort of experience on the ayahuasca. I don't know if it's because I had that expectation going into it and it became like a self-fulfilling experience, or if it was just, natural flowing with the medicine. But after the fact, it just, reflecting on it, it felt like what others have, have recounted to me as a similar, I guess, classic ayahuasca experience. So I'm wondering, does any of this imagery or symbolism that people talk about in the ayahuasca journey, does that mean anything? Is it just, avatars and kind of constructs of the mind that somehow we create, or is this something separate from our own consciousness?
Look, I've struggled with that question, and I'll give you an example. I was I had yet another rough ceremony, and I was fighting the medicine, and I got this picture, almost like these hero shots of this serpent, right? And the medicine or the spirit was showing me how majestic and beautiful the serpent was, and I was really having a hard time on what I did, what I kind of shouldn't have done at the moment. And I got up and I went outside to just kind of walk it off, because it was a very physical experience. And I tell you, I went outside, and again, this comes back to your earlier question as to why do I think there is a God right now and not before, and what things have happened to me that make me believe there is a higher power. I was literally pacing outside and not letting the medicine do its thing. And I think it's a very interactive process. It's a two-way street. Like, you have to surrender and you have to lose control. And it's something that's very difficult with our programming to do. And allow, and as Taita Juanito says, the medicine knows what you need, and allow this sort of spirit do her thing. So anyway, I went outside. I was pacing, and out of the blue, I did 3 quick circles, and I got flung back towards the Maloka. And something possessed me, made me do these circles, and literally flung me back towards my bed and told me to just go sit my ass down and let the medicine do its thing. And I started laughing because I'm like, that wasn't me. You know, and I just literally went back, sat on my bed. This is arrhythmia. Sat on my bed and literally shook for the next 2 hours and let it do its thing. You know, but right before it, she literally, and I showed me these majestic images of a snake and like hero shots, like, look how beautiful, powerful I am. Yeah. Don't fuck with me.
Yeah.
Which I did, and then she made me go back and do her thing.
That's really interesting, man. So, not to go too far into the weeds with my own experience, but I had a similar account, and you said a couple words there that kind of stuck out to me. One is possessed. So I guess I should preface by saying, people with a Judeo-Christian background in particular, will probably catch that word when you say it, possessed, and they'll say, well, see, that that's what hallucinogenics, that's what psychedelics are. You're giving your body and your mind up to, an outside entity or a spirit, a familiar spirit, and you're being possessed. And I used to kind of think that way too before I did it, to be honest with you. And then after I went through it and realized how positive the experience was and what I actually took away from it in terms of just growth and personal understanding, made me realize that this couldn't be a negative thing. But I definitely, I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. Like I relate to what you said about feeling like you're not in control of your body. Like I definitely felt there were points that I lost control and something else literally came upon me and controlled my body for a time. But your mind is still all there, like you said. It's like I was fully aware of what was going on, but I also knew that I was not in control of my body for a time. And for some people, that's a turnoff. Maybe that's just a Western frame of mind, feeling like we always need to be in control, always in the driver's seat of our lives and our own being. But letting that go was something I was very reluctant to do. But when the ayahuasca hit me, like I didn't have a choice. Like something took over my body and it manifested itself as a serpent, which is why I guess I'm really intrigued with that imagery. But I don't claim to know what it means either. I just I think it's interesting. You touched on that word possessed, and then this concept of losing control, of letting go. And I'm wondering, do the shamans that you've talked to and worked with, is there any sort of rationale or distinguishing between spirits, and how do they distinguish between, I guess, the positive and the negative spirits? Because to me, as an outsider, just a couple years ago, and for many, I think, Western 21st century minds, it all looks the same. So, I mean, how do you really separate the wheat from the chaff or the light from the dark when it really gets down to it?
It's interesting. I talked to Taita. We were talking about his life and all that, and he has he has had ceremonies when he was drinking and not serving, where he's come across sort of dark spirits, and my understanding was that it really is dependent on the conduit, right? The conduit is the shaman and his spirit as to what he attracts, or she. And look, I'm going to say this, and I think Taita Juanito is one of the least human beings I've ever met. And that's the thing. I feel he's just pure and full of love, and that is what is amazing about him. And I think that the person that you need to do something like this with needs to really be of light and love, and that's the most important aspect of this. And generally, I think the energy of the room and the other participants really factor into it of what's coming in and going out of the space. And I feel like it's a very very delicate thing, and how the space is held. And even, for example, even that first time, I had done a bunch of ceremonies with the regular facilitators, if you will, who were American, who were amazing, and I was really having profound experiences, and I really didn't. That's what I thought, right? I thought this was the way it is, and this is great, and this is amazing. And then I did it with Taita Juanito, and it was literally ratcheted up by 200%. And ever since, I've literally been going down that path with either him or the people he's trained along the way. And part of that is, I think that what he brings, or indigenous shamans bring to the table, is just this lineage, right? When they've been drinking this, they know the medicine is their culture revolves around this, and that makes a huge difference. One of my most profound experiences was with Taita Juanito last summer, when he literally woke me up and said, "I received the message, and I've got the solution for you." And I was, my faith in the medicine had waned. I was going through a really rough patch in my life, and I was depressed, and all kinds of terrible things were happening. I had no faith in ayahuasca or anything, but I still went to these ceremonies because of the brotherhood that I felt, the sense of community, which I think we lack, especially in places like Los Angeles, and especially in businesses like the entertainment business that I'm in. So I still went to that just for the camaraderie, but I was a little bit jaded, like, this isn't working, what am I doing, throwing up and shitting myself, like, what's the point of all this, right? And then this is the fourth ceremony over 2 weekends. I'm sleeping like a baby, enjoying myself, listening to music. They wake me up, they go, we've got the solution for you. And lo and behold, it was brutal hour and a half of me having what they call the spiritual death. And finally, after an hour and a half of thinking I'm dying, and and thinking they're praying for me, and thinking in the back of my mind, oh my God, they've killed me, they're going to be in trouble, it's ruining their whole thing, and all this stuff is going through my head. And then finally letting go of everything, of sort of my previous life, all my issues. I was just essentially came out of it feeling amazing. And it's been almost 7-8 months. It's lasted since then, where I haven't kind of gone back into that malaise that I was in back last summer. And I look at that and going, I do believe he received the message, because he had never done that with me before. I do believe there was this sort of bigger, if you will, bigger plan for me personally, by the universe, as crazy as it sounds, that this is all part of that plan. And the universe, whatever that means, communicates something to Taita, who woke me up, gave me a drink, made me shit myself and throw up, and then I came out of a better person.
When you put it that way, it sounds crazy, right? But it's accurate.
It's all crazy.
Yeah.
Right? It's all crazy. People think, like, I almost got into, I don't lose my temper as much now as I used to when I didn't drink ayahuasca, but I almost lost my cool with somebody who kept saying, this is a drug, this is a drug. I'm like, no, this isn't a drug. There's nothing fun about this. Drugs are fun.
Exactly.
You go, you take drugs, you have fun, then you feel like shit the next day. There's this, you feel like shit, and then you feel amazing. It's the complete opposite.
Yeah, there's nothing recreational about ayahuasca. I think that was a hurdle a lot of folks I've talked to about it have had a hard time getting over, thinking that this is something that you would do recreationally. I mean, I can attest, as well as yourself, there's not a bone in your body that once you've done ayahuasca would ever want to do it recreationally. That just doesn't even compute. This is something that you have to mentally and even physically prepare for. I know I had to fast going into it for a couple of days, and it's not something you take lightly, and definitely there's no upshot if you're looking for a release or some sort of positive euphoric experience. That stuff comes after, like you said.
And also, integrating what you learn, because there's a lot of learning that happens, right, during the night. And whether it's self-reflection, whether the spirit is actually planting these ideas or helpful thoughts in your head, whatever it is, you somehow you learn things, and you come out of these nights really a different person. And then the question is, how do you integrate yourself into real life? Because I know I had a hard time, connecting with my real life, right? Connecting with how things like in Los Angeles. It's just a very difficult process reintegrating, and because you become fundamentally different. So it's very easy to go back to who you were, or you can try and implement some of these teachings and become a different person.
Mm. So Taito Juanito, you've mentioned a few times, he's featured heavily in the film. For those hearing the name, and if it doesn't ring a bell, when you see the film, you'll get to, I guess, journey with him as he kind of guides a couple of folks who you also may recognize them, by the way. I guess B-list celebrities. One of them was Kerry Rhodes, who I found fascinating, former NFL Hall of Famer, current Hall of Famer, former NFL star. I've been a football fan my whole life, so it was kind of neat and unexpected to see him in the film and kind of the journey he walks through. And then I think Anna Lynn McCord was the other familiar face you'll recognize, Hollywood actress. So it was kind of neat to watch him guide them through this experience and kind of overcome some of their concerns and maybe presuppositions about what the ayahuasca experience would be like, and then seeing them come out the other side later on in the film. That was really rewarding for me because it was kind of a microcosm, I think, of society at large, and I think they kind of addressed many of the concerns that I think people in general may have about ayahuasca and plant medicines. But then just seeing the benefits and kind of just seeing the smiles on their face and the personal growth at the end. To me, that's what it's all about. That's why I think, rightly so many people are kind of preaching this message of plant medicine and really trying to change the stigma, remove the stigma from it. But like I said earlier on, it still remains a Schedule I drug in America. So I'm wondering, as you make this film and you kind of interact with the shamanic culture in South America, but also working with Americans, what do you think the future is? Like, do you see the perceptions changing? Where do you think we're going to be 5-10 years from now?
I mean, that's a really amazing question. I think I wanted to make something that's mainstream and will make this accessible and not seem as crazy to people as it may seem, with the hope that enough people would be interested in something like this, and they can see and that would need help, they would seek out the right shaman to do this. Maybe go to Costa Rica to Rhythmia, maybe go to Colombia, maybe go to Peru, and with the right setting and the right environment, and do this for their own benefit. That was the goal. Having said all that, I think psychedelics overall are really beneficial for all the sort of the elements that we are feeling as a society, induced by anxiety and stress and depression and PTSD. I think psychedelics are making a really interesting movement. All the decriminalized movements all over the country are really bringing this up in the media, and it's getting coverage now. And I think it's very quietly making the rounds, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's obvious that antidepressants aren't working. I think big pharmaceuticals companies are going to have issues with this movement ultimately. I don't know. It just has to be done in a clever, almost quiet way, and not make too much fuss about it, like in the 60s, because that got quashed pretty quickly, right? Mm-hmm. But I do think there is there is benefit here. That is, whether microdosing psilocybin or full on having a week a week of ayahuasca ceremonies, I think it's all beneficial.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about psilocybin as well as LSD and maybe like peyote, which is also used in some Native American rituals. In Texas, I think they still have some religious practices among Native American groups based around peyote. I'm wondering, do you kind of put all of the hallucinogenics or plant medicines into one bucket? Do you, I guess, differentiate between them in any way? And what do you think, I guess, is the unifying thing between them, but also like what are the differences, if there are any, in terms of public perception?
Look, I think public perception is really straightforward. It's all drugs, right? It's very, they don't know the nuances of the different psychedelics. I personally think that ayahuasca, for example, is more of a ceremony, more spiritual than psilocybin. I think that, I've done a San Pedro ceremony thinking that it would be as spiritual and as sort of profound as an ayahuasca ceremony, and it wasn't. That was a little bit lighter, and it seemed like the ceremony itself was more akin to it wasn't introspective enough for my taste. I do think ayahuasca still, for me, is the more spiritual of the bunch. And I know there are people doing psilocybin, even marijuana, in a ceremonial setting. They're doing kava. They're doing all kinds of stuff in a ceremonial setting. And I think it's all different variations of the same goal, which is healing.
Yeah. The interesting thing to me, at the end of the day, no matter which way you slice it, is the fact that these things even exist in the earth. Like, why would there be mind-altering plant-based substances that we can consume without overdosing and killing ourselves, if they weren't meant to be ingested? Like, I'm a firm believer that there's a remedy for pretty much everything in the earth. Like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't go out and, get vaccinated for certain illnesses. I'm just saying that I believe that the earth provides everything we need, to live an abundant life. And to me, whether that's cannabis or psilocybin, all things in moderation, right? Like, everything serves a purpose. And I guess, going back to what you said earlier on, I think you were talking about how the shamans believed that the gods literally, revealed these things, like came down from the heavens and revealed these things centuries and centuries ago. And that's how they, the knowledge of them came into being. I've heard something similar. I think I heard that it was like revealed to shaman in a dream or something, and that was the start of it. I know Terence McKenna used to have the stoned ape theory, which I still think is kind of intriguing. This idea that this discovery of mind-altering plant drugs is what led to evolution, basically creating modern Homo sapiens, because it made us aware of our own. It made us conscious. It made us self-aware. Just by ingesting these things and having, come out the other side of it, I definitely see why you might conclude that. Like, there's definitely a potential for that to be kind of a first cause in terms of self-awareness or consciousness. But what do you think? I guess this is more of a spiritual question, I guess, or an esoteric, like, mystery question. What is the root of this mystery? Where did it come from? Why? Is it put here? Is it here, just by happenstance, or intended for us to consume? And where did it start? Like, where did the knowledge of it begin?
I think it definitely was intended for us to consume. I think pretty much all ancient cultures have some sort of psychedelic that they take from the ground, and they use it for some sort of connection, right, to the spirit realm. I think that, I kind of believe that, man was too primitive. They didn't have labs back then to figure this out. I do believe that somehow this knowledge was transferred from wherever to early humans. Have you seen the band TED Talk by Graham Hancock?
I have, yes.
Yeah, I really agree with his conclusion that I think that's, I think the powers that be, whoever they are, and not to get too much into conspiracy stuff, they really don't want people to be conscious and thinking and connected to the spirit world, to humanity, to nature. Look at what's happening these days. And I think it's just a bit of a sort of control thing. I think that psychedelics really are a portal to a better spiritual life for a lot of people. And it's been demonized over the past couple decades, 30, 40 years.
Yeah, I think you just kind of answered it indirectly in a way, but I wanted to ask you, do you think the ayahuasca experience in particular is opening the door to a spiritual dimension? Are we actually engaging with another plane of reality and maybe entities and spirits in that realm? Or is it more of an internal dive into our own psyche and consciousness? That's like the great debate, right? Are we exploring what's already there within us, or are we actually engaging with a foreign entity?
I think it depends what your definition of the universe is, right? If you believe you're one with the universe, you're communicating with the universe, and you're all one. Look, part of it is again, this is how hard it is to explain this. As you know, you see this sacred geometry, you see all this stuff happening, and you're wondering, there's no interpreting it, right? But there's something that's being downloaded in your brain, in your, not brain, I should say, in your consciousness, right? And the question is, what is consciousness, and where do we go from here? And one thing that I was thinking about doing one of these ceremonies was that, you're seeing all these really intricate shapes, and I don't particularly think I'm that bright, so I'm like, how would I have this in my brain? How would I have these sort of intricate geometrical shapes that are so perfect, so well designed? If it is coming from my brain, where would it be?
Right. Or what you said about someone speaking in foreign language that they've never learned. That's the classic definition of speaking in tongues. Like, where does that come from?
Yeah, and before all this, I didn't believe in previous lives. When people talked about that kind of stuff, I really just thought, okay, well, they're a little too much for me, right? And more and more, I've accepted all that and trying to explore it. And it's really hard to undo 47 years of programming, and I'm trying. I'm definitely open to be deprogrammed, but it's not an easy journey.
Yeah, something that came through heavily for me, actually more so on psilocybin than ayahuasca, to be honest with you, was the eternal nature of the soul. Like, not only the fact that we'll always be here, but in a sense that we have always been here. So I had this, I guess, just deep realization that, like, we'd been here before. Like, this was not the first time around, and it won't be the last. Like, and I don't even necessarily mean that in a reincarnation sense, like coming back into this world over and over again. I just mean the soul is not destructible. Like, it's always been in the ether somewhere. Like, it's always existed with no lack of things to do, and it always will exist. Like, that realization came through heavy for me with ayahuasca and psilocybin, but I don't know if that's a universal experience. Just when you mentioned it kind of clicked for me, because that was something that came through strong, like this idea of immortality. And it almost made me wonder, okay, does the notion of immortality in the afterlife have its roots in a psychedelic experience, somewhere ages and ages ago that, somebody wrote down and maybe built religions and ideologies around?
Yeah, I really feel that's why, when people do ayahuasca journeys and have a vision of a loved one they've lost, they come back and they kind of know that, okay, at some point they're going to, they're going to be reunited, right? But they're not gone. They're just gone in a physical sense.
Yeah.
I also had a experience that was in ayahuasca. It was I don't know what it was, but it was lab created psilocybin, and when I was going through my depression, my friend's like, "Hey, you should come over," and because I was like, "Hey, I'm being suggested that I should take antidepressants," and he's like, "No, before you do that, come over." And by the way, I was never really that serious about taking antidepressants. I mean, I can't imagine anything worse. Right. But he's like, "Come on over. We'll do something that he ordered somewhere," and it was a crazy experience where I connected and I was talking to the universe, and the universe was telling me that life is really meaningless. And this next part is woo-woo, so I apologize. Without love, right? And it just really imprinted that in me, that love is really what really will make people's lives different. And we inherently kind of just don't really take that too seriously.
Yeah, I mean it's almost cliche, but it's just as powerful as ever. And I don't mean to diminish it at all, because I absolutely feel what you're saying. And it's sad that there's like this tarnish that comes with it when everybody talks about it, right? You get like this, I don't know, maybe it's because like the hippie culture in the 60s and 70s and all the excess that came with it, but it really does cause people to kind of, I guess, diminish the value of what you just said, because until you feel it, I guess, you really need to feel it and come through it on the other side to really know the weight of it. Like, I can relate to it, but only because I've been through it myself. I'm thinking of myself 2 years ago before I actually had lived it. Listening to what you would have said, I would have said, "Oh, okay, like this guy's just a hippie, like new ager." But there's so much more depth to it than that.
Believe you me, I would have said the same thing, right? I would have been like, if you had said 3.5 years ago, I would be on a podcast talking like this, I would say you're absolutely nuts. You're out of your mind, because I was completely jaded, not a hippie, and completely just black and white. And now it's like all bets are off, really. Yeah. Like, whatever. Yeah. Like, I believe it.
And that's why it was so great to see such a diverse group of people. More and more you're seeing it, of people kind of getting exposure and becoming evangelists for this plant medicine, like having people like Kerry Rhodes and athletes and people who are kind of considered as like those alpha, ambitious go-getter types, seeing them, and the reaction they have to the journey. That, I think that really opens some eyes. It's definitely opening eyes, in the macro sense. I think a lot of soldiers are coming back and seeing it as an alternative to antidepressants after they've been in the field and they're dealing with PTSD. When I did ayahuasca, it was in a group ceremony. I didn't know any of the folks there, but a couple of them were veterans. And come to find out, actually, the shaman who ran that session, he does some sessions where he only allows veterans in. Like, that's his specialty. He works with veterans. And I mean, I got to see it firsthand. It was a powerful experience, like, sad and uplifting at the same time. But seeing them work through their issues over the course of the night, I mean, I would venture to say that 4 hours probably accomplished what maybe 2 years of therapy might have accomplished for them. I mean, it was that impactful. And now you're starting to see that. I mean, like in clinical settings, they're starting to experiment with the impacts that this has on depression, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes over the next few years. But with the film coming out in a few months, to the masses, I know it's already been released at festivals. What kind of message do you want people to take away from this? Not only, I guess, piquing their curiosity, but what do you want people to understand about the medicine?
Well, I think people need to be open to different avenues of healing. And I, with making the documentary, I think we tried very hard to strip the man bun out, keep very
good move,
very middle of the road. And again, it's not that I'm anti-hippie or anti-man bun or any of that stuff, or I just feel that mainstream America can benefit from this as well. Like you said, these veterans, I met a couple of snipers who've done ayahuasca, and they're just the most amazing people, that now having gone through it, they just come out of that, and they realize that they were literally programmed to do something specific for something that they didn't quite understand, right? And now they've been able to process all that and come to terms with where they've been, right? So, and and most soldiers are not hippies, as you were saying earlier. So I think that for me, the biggest thing is that, we did a screening in Cleveland, and people were rolling in, and I just got really self-conscious about it. I'm like, man, are these people going to understand this? I was like, well, what am I doing here in December in the cold in Cleveland showing this film? And they loved it. They asked amazing questions. They were into it. They got it. And that was a big relief. I think that everybody can benefit from some sort of psychedelic, if not ayahuasca, something else that's more accessible and can benefit from it, because we all have trauma.
Yeah.
Different variations, but we all have some sort of trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why it's a universal medicine. It kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about, there's a reason why this was made available to us in the earth, and the stigma around it is purely man-made. Like this, I believe it was put here for that reason. I mean, wars always existed. People have always had some level of PTSD, whether it's like it is now or not, it can be debated, but, people have always dealt with depression and PTSD and things like this, even end of life, just, coping with the end of life. I mean, it does wonders. And to me, that's just not coincidental. And we're basically cutting an arm off. It's the equivalent of cutting off a limb when we, refuse these things to people, at critical junctures of their own lives, when this could significantly aid them. In America in particular, we're dealing with an aging population where people are living longer and longer. I mean, imagine what sort of enhancement it would provide to society if some of these things like psilocybin and maybe even ayahuasca were legal. I don't know. I'm dreaming, but I think we're on that road, and it's encouraging to see films like yours kind of helping pave the path for the future.
Yeah, no, thank you. Maybe we can just be nicer and kinder to each other.
Yeah, it's a novel idea, right?
Yeah.
A few months back, I interviewed a couple of folks from a film dealing with the same subject matter as yours. It was called From Shock to Awe, and a journey of hope and transformation. And those guys were military vets, and the film focused on veterans coming back to the States, coping with normal American life after deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. And that was impactful as well, because these guys were veterans, and you just see the transformation in their lives over the course of this film, from not knowing what ayahuasca was and being totally averse to any sort of outside substance, and then actually going through the ceremony, and then just being changed men. Like by the time I talked to these guys and did the interview, it was like talking to different people from the folks that I saw at the beginning of the film. So it was just visual evidence like that. I mean, the testimony that some of these people have, I mean, it almost makes it sound like a religion. It's really not. It's just truly transformative and eye-opening. And I think more and more people, as they get exposure to that, will be the best evidence that this is a positive thing and not a negative.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you can also see the difference. Like the night before a ceremony, everybody comes in kind of edgy and not that friendly. And then the next morning, it's like this sort of everybody's filled with joy and love. Maybe because they just survived one of the toughest nights of their life, right? But still, you just see how everybody's just lighter. And by 9, 10 in the morning, everybody just kind of smiles. It's really powerful stuff, and that's the hope of the documentary, is to just kind of at least get people to be open to it.
Yeah. Well, Farzin, where can people get their hands on the film? When can they get their hands on it if they would like to watch it themselves?
Well, it's coming out in July on Apple iTunes and Google Play and all that fun stuff, all this your favorite streaming channels. And in the meantime, we're barring any further disruptions to what's going on in the country with the coronavirus, we're doing screenings around the town where we're having some discussions around the movie, and those have been great. These screenings have been amazing. Like I said, we've done a bunch of cities, and we're going to continue doing them in the spring.
Great. All right. Well, Farzin Toossi, it's been a pleasure. If people would like to learn more about the film in the lead up to the wider release date this summer, where can they go to learn more about the film?
Our website, themedicinedocumentary.com.
Okay, perfect. All right, I will post a link to the website in the show notes, along with a little bit more detail about Farzin's work. And if you'd like to get in touch, feel free to reach out to the show, and we can put you in touch with Farzin if you'd like. I hope you guys will check out the film when it comes out this summer. And I, having seen it myself, highly recommend it. You guys put together a great piece of work here, and I really hope that it, continues to spread the awareness and the word when it comes to ayahuasca and plant medicine in general, and helps to continue to remove that stigma. So keep on fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much. Amazing talking to you, Joshua. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you too. I hope we can do it again sometime. And if you have anything else coming out in the future, or actually, I meant to ask you that. What are you working on now, or what are you going to be working on in the future?
Well, I'm back to my day job. I've been working in TV of late, but I think the next. I still want to keep things in Latin America and the Amazon, but I would like to figure out a way to do a documentary about the front lines of the fight to preserve the Amazon. So I'm working on trying to figure that out in a way that's a little bit more impactful. I mean, we saw in January the with all the fires and everything, that was in the news cycle for 2 weeks, but it's just everybody forgot about it. But I feel like that's a really crucial topic that needs to be a little bit better served in the media. It's funny because I've been hearing about the destruction of the Amazon for pretty much all my life. I mean, Sting in the 80s was talking about it, and it's just getting worse, but just nothing really is, feeling any kind of change.
Well, it's another noble cause. I mean, if that's something that you do pursue, keep us posted, and certainly let me know how we can contribute in any way to help make that film a reality, because that's another one that I think is certainly, appropriate for this time.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Farzin, and looking forward to the wider release of the film this summer. And hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joshua. Have a good night.
Take care.
And anytime you introduce fear into a logical process, whether it's linear, spherical, or otherwise, you're going to distort things.